Good morning, everyone. Archbishop Richard Gagnon here, speaking to you on our Friday morning report. It is October the 21st. Thank you very much for joining us. And so this morning we have a few odds and ends that I'll share with you about the Church in Canada, about the Archdiocese over the next few minutes. Great to communicate with you this morning on this Friday. First of all, last Sunday I celebrated with the Metropolitan Ukrainian Catholic Archbishop Lawrence Husalek, the 100th anniversary of the Ukrainian Catholic Parish of the Blessed Virgin Mary here in Winnipeg. It's one of the truly historical parish churches in our city. Winnipeg has many historic churches, and the Catholic community, whether it be the Latin or the Byzantine, Eastern rites, go back many, many years here in the heart of North America in a place called Winnipeg, Manitoba. So, you know, historical churches play a very important role, I think, in society. They have an immense influence, parishes in general, but it's not one of the things that you read about in the papers so much, even though we're fortunate here that we do have a faith page in the Winnipeg Free Press, but generally speaking, you don't hear much about this. And maybe that's good in a way because it's a very quiet influence. What do I mean by that? Well, you look at a church 100 years old here in Winnipeg, and you think over the years, thousands of baptisms, thousands of marriages, decades and decades of religious instruction for Canadian Catholics, helping them to be better Christians and better citizens of the country. Large sums of money over the years goes to various charities. These are all very important influences within society that we don't often think about, we don't often bring attention to, but it is a fact of the fabric of our Canadian society. So I just wanted to share that with you. So it's the same thing with the Ukrainian Catholic Church of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the city of Winnipeg. When I had the privilege of celebrating with many Ukrainian Catholic priests, trying to follow the liturgy as best I could, an hour and a half or so, a fabulous liturgical choir. It was a wonderful celebration. And one of the things that's interesting about this particular parish, and it's just one of those little tidbits we have in the ecclesial reality of Winnipeg, is that the Mass of Consecration, the Divine Liturgy, Ukrainian Catholics call the Mass the Divine Liturgy. In Anglo-Saxon, I would use the words godly work. That's what it means, godly work. The Mass of Consecration for this parish church, dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary, was led by Bishop Nikita Budka. Blessed Nikita Budka, he's beatified. And he was in Winnipeg for a while. In fact, he was the first Canadian Catholic Ukrainian Archbishop in our country. And shortly after that consecration, which was 1922, 1923, he returned back to Europe, Eastern Europe, where he labored for many years in the underground church when the Soviet Union had dominated all of Eastern Europe. He was a great defender of the Catholic faith, a great defender of union with the Holy Father, with the Pope in Rome. And he was eventually sent away to the Gulag Archipelago, these work camps that the Soviet Union established for political enemies and for criminals. He was there for 8 years and continued to teach, continued to witness to his faith, to his Catholic faith. And eventually he died in the work camp. And there was a bishop who wrote a little description of what happened to people who died in the camps. They were stripped of their clothing. They were placed in plastic bags and brought out into the forest and left for the animals to consume. And so revered was Nikita Budka that they did not strip him down, but they did bring him into the forest, and he was left out there. And there was a delegation of prisoners who went out to find the body and all they could find was pieces of shirt. So he was consumed by the animals in the same way as the martyrs in the early church. And so that particular parish in our city does have that link to a very well-known blessed. And you know, we Latin Catholics often don't know that much about the saints of the Eastern Church. And that's important for us to be aware of that, because it's all one church, different expressions to liturgical prayer and so on. We also know that in the city of Winnipeg, we have the second national shrine dedicated to a martyr. There's the Canadian Martyrs in Midlands, Ontario, a very famous place to visit, the Jesuit Martyrs, that complex out there. It's a very historic, very interesting place of devotion to go to north of Toronto. But we have the National Shrine dedicated to Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky, Bishop Vasyl Velychkovsky. You know, many of our Eastern brothers and sisters suffered a lot under communism, under the Soviets, and he's another case in point. And he was also a great laborer in the underground church and witnessing to the faith and the union of the Ukrainian Catholic Church with the Holy Father in Rome. And he suffered for many, many years. It must have been 12, 16 years in concentration camps in the Gulag Archipelago under the Soviets. And eventually he came to Canada, and he was suffering through the many chemical injections that he had, that they were experimenting upon him in the camps, the beatings he had, all the rough treatment. He died here, only a shadow of his former self. And his body is in Winnipeg at St. Joseph's Ukrainian Catholic Church in our city. And so we should know that. And I often wonder, you know, do parents ever take advantage of this? There's not many national shrines in Canada. That's one of them. And, you know, teach our children about the importance of our faith and witnessing to our Catholic faith. You know, the word martyr means witness, to witness to the faith. And these two men, Blessed Nikita Budka and Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky, are two martyred saints for their faith. And they stood up for their faith under very, very difficult circumstances. So just wanted to share that with you. It's just part of our, you know, our history here in Winnipeg that is worth knowing about. And perhaps at some point in another Friday report, I'll invite someone to come and speak about Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky, because his life story is fascinating. In conclusion of this little segment of our Friday report, this reflection on the Ukrainian Catholic Church, of course, we know that there's great suffering among the Ukrainian Catholics, among Ukrainian people in general, because of the war in Ukraine. I wanted to be in solidarity with them at the time of that liturgical event in the city. We have posted onto the website a wonderful video that Metropolitan Lawrence showed to the bishops in Canada at the plenary at the end of September. It's entitled "Our Front, Ukraine United." Have a look at it. It tells you what it was like, what it is like in Ukraine for the parishes, and what the parishes are doing in Ukraine to help those who are refugees fleeing the war zone and have nothing except a shirt on their backs. And it's well worth looking at. We've also posted on the website in 2 languages, in English and in French, the pastoral letter that just came out from all the Ukrainian Catholic bishops in Canada, addressed to Canadians. And the name of the title of the pastoral letter is "The War in Ukraine, a Call to Prayer, Fasting, and Action." Something to read, meditate upon, and a challenge to all of us to support our Ukrainian brothers and sisters undergoing the invasion, the war in their homeland. Well, thank you very much for reflecting on that important aspect of our faith. On a less positive note, I mentioned last week about YouTube's attempt to interfere with pro-life messaging on YouTube by adding a disclaimer to videos featuring a pro-life message, including some of the videos of the Holy Father. You know, this disclaimer pops up and linking a person to abortion websites and so on. So I mentioned that, and to be aware of that in our country, what is going on in terms of trying to muffle truth, trying to muffle alternate points of view in our country of Canada, and also in the United States, because YouTube stems from there. Another disturbing trend is the proposal in Canada, just over the last few weeks, to euthanize babies with severe health problems or disabilities. This is an ongoing discussion now in parts of Canada. Who would have thought, eh? It would come under the title of infanticide, because the Catechism of the Catholic Church talks about infanticide as a grave moral evil and another step in the direction of free choice. Choice. Where did that word choice come from, and how is it interpreted today? There's a whole background to this. Your choice is now possibly extending to the death of children by parents. The argument is it's another argument that is linked to compassion, to be compassionate. There's a suffering, there's a difficulty, and if you're truly compassionate, you want to relieve that person of their suffering, of their difficulty, by ending one's life. The word compassion is a powerful argument indeed. There is no doubt that some of the illnesses and disabilities that children may have are very severe. But, when you think about it, this does not justify parents ending the life of their children. I mean, this is a very serious conversation that's happening in Canada. This would have been unthinkable 40 years ago. It's also good to remember that MAID, medical assistance in dying, which means physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia in reality, began in Canada with legislation 2016, and a person who could qualify for MAID would be a person of sound mind, of a legal age and sound mind, and where death was imminent. And that was 2016. Now, that was a thin edge of the wedge, because at that time people talked about, well, that's opening the door to all kinds of other possibilities. And we're seeing now what's happening is that the imminent death category is no longer required, that there is also an opening up to those who may want to give advance directive because of a diagnosis of dementia. We get into the area of those with disabilities, and now we have the question of mental illness, which is being discussed this spring in Canada. And these discussions are occurring, and including this latest one about the euthanization of children who have severe illnesses and disabilities. I think a few points about this might be worth bringing to your attention, besides the fact that we need to be aware of these things and not to be complacent, because we live in a culture that has accepted abortion, and once we make that step, other areas also are opened up. There are tremendous advancements in medicine, tremendous progress in the area of treatments, of medicine, managing pain, and so on and so forth. There's also the ability, unfortunately, ability is the wrong word to use, there's also the reality of a incomplete diagnosis or a misdiagnosis. So that happens as well. I mean, medicine is not an exact science in the sense that doctors do the best they possibly can, but there's so many variables in medicine. There's always those exceptions and incompleteness of diagnosis that occurs. That's something certainly to keep in mind. We also keep in mind too, many of those people who we might know personally in families that we know, or maybe our own family, where there has been a disability or a serious illness, where the person has managed to work through that with the help of parents and others to live successful lives through that. There's many, many examples of that. And that's also part of this context, that healing itself, medicine itself, is meant for healing, not for death. And I think John Paul II was very prescient when he brought forth, the phrase. He wasn't the first to use it, but he certainly used it a lot. developing a culture of death. We're living in a culture of death. The boundaries are expanding. So this is sort of a negative message today, but like last week too, we have to be aware of some of these trends in society for sure. Education is important, to educate ourselves about the different issues of the sanctity of life, to educate ourselves of what it means to accompany someone who is experiencing difficulty, illness or disabilities. How is that engaged? What is the church teaching on this? How do we approach that? The Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops produced a wonderful video called Horizons of Hope. There's 4 videos, I believe, on different aspects of this, meant for parish use, for people to see and have a discussion afterwards about this question of euthanasia and the sanctity of life. I certainly encourage you to think about that and to Google that, to get that program into parishes. Horizons of Hope. And there are many successful lives that have been lived in spite of severe disabilities. I know of one personally, Father Patrick Martin. Some of you may know of this priest, a blind priest, who has been to Winnipeg, I think, many years ago. I remember in the 1980s, I brought him to Canada in the parish I was in to give a parish retreat. I knew very little about him, except his message was God loves you, and defied all this in our life of God's love. Is a tremendous retreat he gives. He's 70 or so now, years of age. And he was born with meningitis, and his parents were told by the doctors that he would be a vegetable for the rest of his life, but the parents didn't just settle with that. They worked hard with him, taught him how to walk, kept pushing him physically, pushing him and pushing him. Eventually he regained his physical ability to walk and to get around, to move around. And then his blindness, he had pinpoint vision. He could read one letter at a time, not whole words, but one letter at a time. And over the years, he began to study in a very restricted sense, one letter at a time. He gained a degree in English literature. Do you believe that? He got a degree, a master's of library science. He loves librarians and libraries. Here's a fellow who could only read one letter at a time, very, very restricted vision. And eventually became a priest and a very successful retreat giver. And this was a fellow that was called a vegetable at the beginning of his life. And he'd often say that you're listening to me talk to you. I'm a very eloquent turnip, he would say, to emphasize the fact that he was called a vegetable. He would be a vegetable for the rest of his life, but he ended up to be a very, very educated man and a wonderful giver of retreats. I also came across another example of a member of the House of Lords in England. Her name is Jane Campbell, Baroness. She's an aristocrat. I would call it severe physical disability in a wheelchair. She needs all kinds of assistance to do just about everything. But she'd be the last person in the world to refer to herself as a person with severe disabilities. She believes that once a person is given engagement, once that person is given a sense of dignity, a sense of ability, and the talents that they have, there's no limit what they can do. And she is a great defender of people with disabilities, in spite of the trends in England to move towards, like Canada, towards physician-assisted suicide, widening those boundaries, and so on and so forth. There's many, many examples, but I would simply go to maybe people you know personally who have worked through these issues and have lived lives of great success and hope in spite of these disabilities. Empowerment. Jane Campbell would talk about empowerment. Once we are empowered, there's no limit to what we can do. So to become aware of this, I think, and what is happening in our country, to realize that we have democratic rights and to exercise them in such a way where life is protected. That's a big responsibility we Christians have. And we also have a right to advocate for life and to advocate for another point of view in our society where points of views are being stifled. So just want to mention those things today in our Friday report. I want to draw your attention too to the a new website that you can find a link on our website, the Indigenous Reconciliation Fund. That's the National Indigenous Reconciliation Fund. Our Solidarity Fund that I mentioned last week in the Friday report, that goes to the Indigenous Reconciliation Fund in Ottawa, and our application for the application of those funds, the disbursement of those funds to a particular charity is reviewed, and those funds are applied to the choices that we make in Winnipeg. And so it's a way of having a national accountability by having the Indigenous Reconciliation Fund, which assists our Solidarity Fund here in Winnipeg. Now, that website's very good, beautiful website. You can see who are the directors of that Indigenous Reconciliation Fund. You can see something about its structure and also the latest news regarding that. So I just simply refer you to that for your own information. Once again, we have achieved over half of our reconciliation fund, of our Solidarity Fund rather, in the city of Winnipeg. I look forward very much to another successful drive this fall. Consider the Solidarity Fund for Healing and Reconciliation in the Archdiocese of Winnipeg. And we also have, of course, our Sharing God's Gifts, which supports the resources we pour into various categories of mission work in the diocese, catechetics, and so on. And I have a pastoral letter that has gone out to parishioners that explains both the Solidarity Fund and the Sharing God's Gifts drive. I'd ask for your prayers also for the Catholic Corporation of Manitoba's retreat this weekend. They've changed the name. The name of the Catholic healthcare in Manitoba is now Réseau Compassion, or the Compassionate Network. And leaders in the Catholic healthcare in Manitoba go on retreat once a year to look at strategies and future directions. And I'll be part of that on Saturday. So do remember in your prayers those good men and women who work in Catholic healthcare in our province of Manitoba. You know, sometimes people approach me and they say, you know, what is the church doing for reconciliation? And I'm sometimes baffled by that question, because the church has many aspects of it. It's all one church in that way. Catholic healthcare is part of that, and they do a tremendous amount of work in the area of reconciliation, not only in the institutions and hospitals that exist, but in other programs of healing and relationships in our society as well. And that's a growing aspect of Catholic healthcare. They do tremendous work. Our Catholic schools, St. Paul's College, also have programs developing education in that area as well. And our diocese, our parishes, and individual Catholics. So you see, there's many different levels when you think about that. And we have a lot more to do in this great Canadian project of building relationships with Indigenous people in our province of Manitoba. So on a final note today, I just want to mention, a couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege of celebrating Mass for one of our priests of the Archdiocese, Father Sean Cahill, who many of you know, who celebrated his 60th anniversary of ordination. Actually 61, because it was delayed by 1 year due to COVID. And beautiful, his brother, Joe Cahill, is also a priest from Ireland who came to join his brother. And there's a beautiful photograph of myself and Father Sean and Father Joe. Their mother must be very proud, family very proud of these two boys who went to the seminary and ordained priests, and one became more or less a missionary in Canada and the other in Ireland, who also worked in other foreign missions as well. So anyways, congratulations, Father Sean, on your commitment to your holy priesthood ordination that we celebrated a couple of weeks ago. Well, thank you very much for listening this morning. We had a few items to share with you. Next Friday we'll continue as well. May God look after all of you and your families and protect you and give you a heart of faith, hope, and charity. The Lord be with you, and may God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.